picture this, a life of luxury, right? You wake up in this huge mansion, it's in a gated community, and the Florida sun, it's just streaming through the windows.
Sounds pretty idyllic.
Yeah, your husband, he's a successful real estate executive.
Okay.
And your daughters, they're beautiful and bright. This was Diane Ward's life.
Oh.
But this picture of perfection, it was shattered on a September night in 2009.
Oh.
A frantic 911 call from Diane's husband, Bob. It echoed through the emergency dispatch center.
Okay.
He claimed he had shot his wife. But was it a tragic accident? Was it a moment of madness? Or was it something more calculated?
So you're saying there's a bit of a mystery here.
Exactly. Today we're diving deep into the Bob Ward mansion shooting.
Okay.
We're going to peel back the layers of this complex case to try to uncover the truth behind that fateful night.
Sounds intriguing. It's a case that really captivated the nation, with its mix of wealth, privilege, and ultimately tragedy. And as we dig into the details, you'll see how this seemingly perfect life, it was actually riddled with cracks, financial pressures, a marriage that was teetering on the brink.
Right. Welcome to CrimePod Castle's Twisted Crime series.
Oh, yeah.
To really understand what happened that night, we've got to first get to know Bob and Diane Ward.
Yeah, makes sense.
So who was Bob Ward?
Well, Bob Ward, he was really prominent in the world of real estate. I mean, he had this charisma, the kind that just draws people in. And he built his fortune developing these luxury homes. But, the 2008 housing crisis, it hit his ventures hard.
Right.
And that financial strain, it started to cast a shadow over their seemingly perfect life,
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And what about Diane? What was her role in all of this?
Well, from what we know, Diane was a devoted mother and wife. She stood by Bob's side, offering support through all the ups and downs of his career.
Yeah.
Together, they had 2 daughters, and they presented this image of, a happy, loving family.
But as we often see in cases like this, appearances can be deceiving.
Oh, absolutely. And in the Ward's case, that financial pressure cooker, it was starting to whistle,
Right.
Think about it. The stress of all those debts piling up, the fear of losing everything you've worked for. I mean, it can put a lot of strain on any relationship.
Yeah, for sure. So this perfect facade, it was starting to crumble. And then came that chilling 911 call on September 21st, 2009.
Yeah, it's a really unsettling recording. You can hear the panic in Bob's voice as he tells the dispatcher, "I just shot my wife."
Oh, wow.
But then his story, it starts to shift. He claims it was an accident, but the details are murky, inconsistent.
He seems almost bewildered. Like he's trying to convince himself it was an accident, almost as much as he's trying to convince the dispatcher. It's unnerving to listen to.
Yeah, you can really hear it in his voice.
So when the police arrived at the mansion, what did they find?
Well, Diane was found in the master bedroom. She had a gunshot wound to her head.
Oh, my God.
Bob, he was visibly distraught, and he stuck to his story that the gun went off accidentally during some kind of struggle.
But something wasn't adding up.
You got it.
Yeah.
The evidence, it didn't quite fit his story.
What do you mean?
Well, the position of the gun, the trajectory of the bullet, it all raised some red flags for the investigators.
I see.
Think of it like this. If you throw a ball against a wall, the angle it bounces off will tell you where it came from, right?
Right.
Well, in a similar way, the path of the bullet, it contradicted Bob's version of what happened.
So right from the start, you had these conflicting narratives. And as the investigation unfolded, it became clear that this was going to be a really complex case with a lot of unanswered questions.
Oh, yeah. And remember those financial troubles we were talking about earlier? Well, they became a central focus of the investigation.
It seems like investigators were peeling back those layers of this picture-perfect life and revealing those darker undercurrents that were swirling beneath the surface.
Exactly. They dug deep into the Ward's finances, and they uncovered the extent of their losses from the housing crisis. The prosecution would later argue that this financial pressure, it created this powder keg of tension in their marriage.
Oh, wow.
Leading to arguments and ultimately a motive for murder.
Really? So they thought it wasn't an accident?
That's what they were building towards.
Wow.
Welcome back to CrimePod Castle's Twisted Crime series.
We're peeling back the layers of the Bob Ward mansion shooting, this case. It seems to defy that saying that money can't buy happiness,
Sometimes it feels like wealth just adds like another layer of complexity to an already complicated situation.
Yeah, this case is a prime example.
Yeah.
On the surface, the Wards, they had this life that many people would envy. Yet beneath that veneer of success, they were dealing with this immense financial strain.
Yeah. And as you go deeper into this case, you start to see how those financial pressures, they might really impacted their relationship. Imagine that weight of all those debts piling up, the fear of losing everything you've worked so hard to build. It could transform even the strongest of bonds into something brittle and fragile.
You can almost feel the pressure cooker building.
Hmm.
That sense of desperation closing in. And when you consider the psychological impact of financial strain, it's not hard to see how things might have escalated.
Absolutely. Financial stress, it doesn't just impact your bank account, it seeps
Okay.
into every facet of your life.
Oh, yeah.
It can trigger those primal fight or flight responses, it can cloud your judgment, it can even lead to blame shifting within a relationship.
So it's like that primal instinct to protect yourself,
Yeah,
even if it means turning against the person who's closest to you.
exactly. And in Bob's case, he was this man. He was accustomed to success, to being in control,
Yeah.
facing financial ruin. It wouldn't have been just a monetary setback for him.
Right.
It would have been a blow to his very identity.
So you have this collision of external pressures and internal struggles,
Right.
creating this really volatile situation.
And then you have that chilling 911 call, which offers us a glimpse into Bob's state of mind in the immediate aftermath of the shooting. The panic, the shifting narratives.
Those desperate attempts to try to explain the unexplainable. It's all there in that recording.
I was really struck by his shifting accounts of what happened. First he admits to shooting his wife, but then he claims it was an accident. It almost feels like he's trying to convince himself as much as the dispatcher.
It's a really crucial piece of evidence because it raises questions about his credibility and his intentions.
Right.
Was he genuinely in shock, or was he crafting some kind of narrative to fit his actions?
It's hard to say for sure, but while that 911 call presented this confused picture, the investigation into the ward's finances, it started revealing a possible motive.
Yeah, that's where things start to get interesting. Remember those procedural errors that led to the overturning of Bob's first conviction?
Yes, that had something to do with attorney-client privilege, right.
Exactly. During the first trial, the prosecution accessed information that was protected by attorney-client privilege. So basically, confidential conversations between Bob and his lawyer.
And his lawyer didn't object properly at the time. And that misstep, it became the grounds for overturning the conviction years later.
So even though a jury found him guilty, there was this legal technicality that threw the whole thing into question.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that the legal system, while it's designed to ensure justice, it's also prone to human error.
Right.
And it really highlights the importance of due process.
Yeah.
Every defendant, regardless of the circumstances, deserves a fair trial. And that includes the right to confidential communication with their attorney.
But even with that overturned conviction, the story didn't end there.
No, it didn't. Bob Ward was granted a new trial, and in a really surprising turn of events, he was found guilty again and received the same sentence, 30 years.
Wow.
So 2 separate juries, years apart, came to the same conclusion.
It makes you wonder what it was about the evidence that convinced both juries of his guilt. What pieces of the puzzle led them to that verdict?
Well, while Bob and his legal team maintained his innocence, there were aspects of the case that seemed to work against him. For one, the forensic evidence. It didn't really align with his claims of an accidental shooting. Remember the trajectory of the bullet we talked about?
Yeah.
That played a really significant role in both trials.
And then there's that matter of the financial pressure the couple was facing. While it might not be direct evidence of murder, it definitely paints a picture of a relationship that was under immense strain.
Exactly, you're right. It's like building a case brick by brick. Each piece of evidence on its own might not be enough for a conviction. But when you put them all together, they can form a pretty compelling narrative.
And a narrative that, in this case, pointed towards Bob Ward's guilt. But amidst all the legal battles and the focus on Bob's culpability, it's crucial to remember Diane.
Oh, absolutely. Her life was tragically cut short. And while the legal system grappled with that question of Bob's guilt or innocence, Diane's story often gets overshadowed.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in all the legal stuff, But we can't forget that at the heart of all this is a human tragedy.
A real tragedy, Diane, was a mother, a wife, a person with hopes and dreams. And her story, it ended so abruptly, so violently. We can't let her just become another name in a true crime case file.
Right, absolutely. So as we wrap up our deep dives into the Bob Ward mansion shooting, I'm left with this question. What really happened in that mansion that night?
It's a question that kind of continues to haunt this case, right? We've got the evidence, the testimonies, the verdicts, but do we really know what went on between Bob and Diane in those moments leading up to that gunshot?
I keep going back to that 911 call, Bob's voice, the way his story changes, the raw emotion.
Yeah.
It's hard to forget. Do you think he was really in shock, or was he being manipulative?
It's tough to say what was going on in his head right then. Maybe he was in shock, struggling to process what he'd done. Or maybe he was already building his defense, trying to distance himself from what he did.
It's a chilling thought. The idea that someone could be so calculating, even in the face of something so awful.
And that ambiguity is part of what makes this whole case so compelling, you know? It forces us to look at that darker side of human nature, the potential for violence that I think we all have.
This case makes you think about the impact of financial stress on relationships, too.
Mm.
The Wards, they were living this life of luxury, but underneath it all, there was all this anxiety and pressure.
Yeah, you can imagine how that constant stress could really damage a relationship. It can cause resentment, blame shifting, and this desperation that clouds your judgment leads to irrational behavior.
It's like a reminder that even in the most perfect-looking life, there can be these hidden struggles going on beneath the surface.
Yeah, and sometimes those struggles can boil over, and the consequences are devastating.
As we finish up here, I'm just struck by how complex this case is. We looked at the evidence, we talked about the legal battles, and we considered the psychology of it all. But in the end, there are questions we just can't answer.
And maybe that's how it is with true crime, you know? We gather all these bits of information, we analyze motives, and we try to make sense of it all. But sometimes the truth is out of reach, hidden in all the speculation and uncertainty.
It reminds us that life is unpredictable. Even for people with money and privilege, things can go wrong. And it leaves us with this question: could this have been prevented?
That's something for each listener to think about, I think. As we step back from this case, I hope it makes you think about the pressure we all face, the importance of talking to each other and supporting each other, and just how fragile life is.
Thanks for coming with us on this journey through the Bob Ward mansion shooting. It's a case that makes you think, makes you consider relationships, financial burdens, and what truth really means.
And if you're into cases like this, be sure to follow CrimePod Castle for more dives into the world of true crime.
And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more. We'll see you next time. Stay curious, stay safe, and as always, keep your minds open.